All right, we're recording. Make no claims about the quality of this evening's video crew.
I mean, all choices are gonna be here, so I'll take the time when we close.
Yeah. Like 3 or 4 of them down here, nothing for us. My bad.
Can you get to try and,
Oh, it's good, isn't it?
you're good or not?
Yeah.
Okay, make a motion, we open meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
First thing I want to talk about is, I did talk to the parish. They'll put together an extension.
For 1 year?
For 1 year.
Okay.
They actually, they're talking about selling the whole,
Mhm.
and, you know, the trail conference is looking to buy it, but I guess they don't want to buy the lower part. So they're working together with, and they offered it to us.
Mhm.
And I asked them what the price was. They didn't know yet. They're in the process of getting it, a fresh appraisal. We'll have to work something out. We can either work with the state or
Yeah,
CWC. And I think it would be in the town's best interest to
I would agree.
get that.
Yeah, and I know the parish would like to see the town get it.
Yeah.
If those numbers come in within the next 3 months, we could do one of those, smart growth grants for them. That'd be eligible, but we would need to have at least an appraised value.
Right.
Prior, like have to have something to write the grant around, so, I think those are due, I wanna say end of August, if I'm not mistaken, mid-August.
Right.
The paperwork will appear in June for whatever the provisions are, so if the program's changed, I mean, that'll be when we would know, but basically, hopefully they can get an appraisal.
Right.
But in the meantime, so would we expect to have that agreement for the next meeting, for the May meeting or the June meeting?
I'm
Should be a copy
hoping for a
paste.
couple of weeks to have that extension at least for the week.
If they're not changing anything, it should just be a copy and paste with the date.
Yeah, it's just, well, I mean, a couple of weeks would put us right after, but it doesn't matter, yeah.
If we don't get it for May, we'll just
Do
get
it
it
in June, okay,
It's not like we're gonna cease operations.
yeah.
Working through some issues with our attorneys and Mountain Jam and a wrinkle about ambulance coverage. So Rich put together some facts and figures to cover the whole event. I'm sure you've heard it somewhere in the.
Briefly.
Yeah. So we put that to Mountain Jam people, and they were, I guess, a little shocked and thought that they could shop it around and find a cheaper way to do it. And then they came back to me with, well, if we, provide an ambulance and EMTs throughout the whole project or the event, could we have Shandaken ambulance there during the concert, and what would that cost us for just the 3 days during the concert hours? When I approached that to Rich, he decided that, that was it. He didn't want to, he thought that would put us in more jeopardy. Would not be easy and not be good. Because if they did a call so long.
So is the issue, sorry, the issue is our ambulance service was too expensive, or we aren't able to cover it?
That was the
dedicated
original, that's the
Okay.
original part of what got Mountain Jam looking at other agencies that do the coverage. But I think, you know, we will be stretched thin if we try to cover that in entirety. And Rich and Mike say that they will be able to pull from the other agencies to get extra so that we weren't. But after they were, what Rich considered just trying to nickel and dime everything, he said, let them just cover the whole thing with other agencies.
We'll just kind of wipe his hands clean of it and just say,
Right.
this
and then
way he's, like you
We're
said.
still fine, we're covered for our town.
Yeah.
And I just ran it past Ben to make sure that we were still covered and legal to just say, no, you find your other agent. And there are other, you know, they can hire through Empress and another company called Ambulance with the Z at the end.
And they're gonna be using Westchester as well through Margaretville.
Yeah.
So,
And a lot of what Rich was worried about was when he thought it would be okay and would work, they were talking about having a doctor on staff 24 hours a day. And now they're talking about, oh, we'll have a doctor within 15 minutes. And Rich is like, that isn't the same thing.
yeah, and for the record, during the event proper, the ski patrol building will be used as a medic tent. So it'll be run by ski patrol, but they have all of their licensed paramedic staff are signed up to operate during the event.
Right.
So it's not like we'd have our paramedics walking out into the field or whatever, if they were there.
Right. And they're, you know, and we know that Bel Air is gonna have coverage for
Yeah,
a lot of that. And then they could just hire out, and I think we'll be safer within the town without having to extend ourselves or overextend ourselves. So that's what's going on in that realm.
They're just gonna have to nail that down pretty quick for the county meeting, because
Yeah,
the
the
county's not
time
gonna
is-
approve it
time's-
if they don't have a EMS service.
Right.
I mean, that's not our problem,
No,
but like
that's-
if they haven't contracted with someone, if they say, well, we're going to contract with an EMS service, I don't think the county's gonna give them a permit with that.
I'd be surprised.
I mean, it seems,
when is the county meeting?
did you say it was the sixth, May sixth?
May 6th, yeah, this is the next meeting up at Bel Air at 10 a.m.
Yeah, so it's just a quick turnaround and sign a contract,
Yeah, 2 weeks.
Unless they're already in,
unless they've already started.
yeah, negotiations with them.
Hopefully they are.
Are there any details around the RV location?
The location is going to be at Cruikshanks, which is up Alexander Road.
And have they provided any maps or numbers or?
Not yet, they're still hashing out
Okay,
the contract between the parties.
and that will be a separate assembly permit from us?
Ben thinks we can do it all and encompass it all together as one, both the camping campsite
Campsites.
and then the RV campsite with 40
Okay,
RV campers.
so they would also, well, yeah, I mean that.
They would also have to have coverage for those 2 campsites.
Well, yeah, and also, I mean, they supplied the, forgetting what the name of the form is, but like the base seeker form for the campground parcel,
But not for the RV.
Right.
which didn't exist at the time, so it made sense, or more correctly, it was still expected to be inflation, so
Right.
it just wouldn't have mattered to us, but now that it's in theory in our town, they would still need to do that document at some point
Right.
prior to the 5th.
Good thought, right?
Yeah, I mean, it honestly, it's, I don't say it's not a hard form, it's just, if they're asking for our approval, we have to have that document, and then we evaluate it. Well, obviously, we can't evaluate a form that
We don't have.
doesn't exist, right? So, I mean, not to say that is a perennial showstopper, but it does seem tricky.
a zillion times, and they will get it or they won't, and.
Okay.
You know, and, I mean, they even have the option, if they drop down below 5,000 people, they're no longer, for the county's sake, it's no longer a mass gathering for the county and
Right,
and the
right.
state. So many of that concern goes away. At this point, I think they're still trying to go for that.
Right, but that wouldn't change our permit.
No, that doesn't
Which
change
is still
anything for us.
500 people.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. This is the guy who called his lawyer in the middle of a meeting and,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, this is that guy.
Are the RVs, they go back and forth every night, or do those people stay there?
Because they were parked there, that's the intent, is they would
And
be
then
parked on the parcel and they would, basically a campsite with wheels for 3 days, right? That's the-
Yeah, but I think they talked about when it was planned for Fleischmann, I believe they were gonna use a shuttle to get people up. but-
Yeah, they'll be using the shuttle stuff.
So,
They don't want those RVs on the road.
It's hard to tell what they want.
Yeah. Well, we know what they want.
I'm surprised there's
With
not enough space
no permit.
up there to do it. Why do they need to be on a private, like, in a,
I think probably because of all the construction projects that are going on, they don't want to use the other lots.
they don't want to?
Yeah.
Another subject, stuff I've gained knowledge about from the school or about our school issues, i.e. the buried tank. I haven't gotten any information on roof replacement. Have you contacted anybody?
I haven't gotten costing back. I have somebody looking over the evaluation.
Okay.
Was hoping to get something today, but I didn't get anything back yet.
Okay. I talked to 2 different firms that do the tank removal. One who just does tank removals out of New Paltz, C2G Environmental Consultants. They gave us an estimate of just to remove, and with all the proper permits from the state and everything that goes along with it, and disposal fees, $29,000. Plus, it, you know, if there's, depending on how much oil is still in the tank and how much, if there's been any spills, blah, 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 blah. That's a base. They don't replace, they do smaller tanks, they don't do anything above, I think, 500 gallons. So I didn't get a price for the replacement above ground. This other company called American Petroleum out of Walden gave me a price for removing the old tank, doing all the cleanup, all the permitting and everything else, and replacing it with a 5,000 gallon above ground tank with all the accoutrement that it's supposed to need, the catchment and alarms and bells and whistles. And that was, 227,000.
The current tank is 10,000 gallons? The current underground tank?
Oh, sorry.
What's the size of the current
Oh,
underground?
10,000 gallons, right. But
I mean, we
here's,
probably wouldn't
and
need it per se.
no,
I mean,
because
5,000.
here's the kicker is, you know, looking back at their past records, they only use 4,000 gallons of oil a year.
Right, yeah.
So even if we put a 1,000 gallon tank in and it filled up 4 times a year, it would be still fine. But this was a replacement of a 5,000 gallon tank, with the one that was 227,000.
So the one company is gonna charge
30,000,
$30,000 just to remove it,
yep.
and then $227,000 to remove and replace.
And replace with a
Are-
5,000 gallon tank.
Are
Now,
tanks that expensive?
don't
It's
think
as if
so.
the 5,000
$200,000?
If you look around, and I have for tanks, they're like, you know, $30,000, you know, a couple of thousand gallon tank. They're like, you know, between 20 and 40,000, not,
And I'm assuming this, like you said, this comes with all the bells and whistles and
Yeah.
and everything.
yeah. And so I called,
Huh.
I left this guy back a message saying, could you separate the removing the one and look at other firms who will give us, and he knows it's not a bid, but he just gave me a price of what, if we were gonna do this.
Ballpark.
Right.
Okay. It just seems like
That's such
a big jump.
a big
you know?
jump.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, I didn't contact any, like I said, roof people. Anybody wanna see these? For perusal.
So, where are we at with that process? Are we still just looking, to see what kind of work needs to be done before we go forth with any other?
Well, Ellie had, Anthony do
Right,
the site,
yeah,
evaluation,
Mhm.
and, aside from these two major components, I think everything else is just, okay, it's old, The heating units that are in there were from, 2018, 2019, something like that, so the heating units are in good shape. The water was in good shape, there's some cracks in the walls, there's cracks in the concrete walkways. I don't know if, the roof, the schools look at it back in 2022, saying that it should be, it's a top priority, it should be replaced soon, and the estimated cost they gave was $780,000. Will we, like this, find something a couple of $100,000 less? Probably. Judging from the school's estimates, I think they like to go on the conservative side, on the heavy
Sure,
side,
there's a cushion.
so they're not short of,
Yeah.
down the road if there's a contingency and blah, blah, blah. So I doubt we can find it for, half the price that the school did, but I'm sure it'll be between 100 and 150 less than what the school put up for a price. So if we look at this in a whole, I think it's a really good opportunity for the town. It's my personal feeling, that if we did a deal for $1 and we look down the road that within 10 years, we may have to spend $1 million, is that, and take out a bond for a 30-year bond to upgrade the school, is that excessive?
Mhm. And do we know if we actually can rent?
That's.
Not if we do $1, then the answer is a definitive no.
Well, here's the thing, in that conversation I had with the comptroller's office, they don't like the idea of the school or any municipality or any kind of entity giving away a property for like $1 or a cheap thing like that, and then the purchaser turning around and using that as a for-profit entity. So the school is giving it to the town, it's gonna be a town facility. I don't think there's any, because Rondout does this too. He said, the supervisors down there rent out a room to an engineering firm. How many places are gonna rent a room in a school? You're not gonna have a record shop there, you're not gonna have a clothing
Oh, I get it.
emporium or
I
something
got
like
it,
that.
probably
You're not
not
gonna
a
have a
dispensary,
discotheque
right.
there, and there's gonna be no bars.
Right,
So is at the end of the day, if we rent out room or rooms to a different entity and they're not a not-for-profit, are we gonna get bashed by the comptroller's office? I don't think so. There were no real rulings about that as like a sublet or, a lease from another.
That goes in direct conflict with what
When I talked to
Paul said.
No, I talked to Paul personally.
We've got an
today.
email, I have in writing from Paul.
Yes,
that-
that's Paul's opinion.
Well, you're suggesting we go with yours over the lawyers?
I'm not saying you
Just
go with
curious.
mine over the lawyers, but I did talk to Paul, and he did say, I see your point that there is nothing in the comptroller's rulings that say if you're gonna sell this, if the school is gonna sell this property for $1 to another entity like a municipality, that they cannot rent out 1 or 2 or 10% or 30% of the property. That there's gonna be anything wrong with trying to offset your residents.
Let's get that in writing from Paul.
And,
Cause you just posed what you're saying now.
I'm
You
not
wrote
saying
an
that we
email
jump in there and
to
that's
Paul.
guaranteed.
But no, I think this is worth clarifying, because what you're saying now, you said to Paul, Paul's response was, no, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Now you're saying, no, I said it to him again, this time he said, I'm right.
No, he didn't, he just said, I see your point, and he didn't say I was right
Okay,
or he was
but
right.
seeing that you have a point doesn't change the legality of it.
No, it doesn't,
Okay,
and
so as
nor
far
did
as we
he
know, we
say
still
what's,
can't do
what's
this
legal. He
according
didn't say,
to
what I
405.
say is the legal.
No, he said that he quoted the law
Yep.
in his email to you.
Yep.
That if a municipality turns it over under code 405, sorry, hang on, I had it, to a public corporation, provided that such real property is to be used by such corporation for the purposes of the corporation or for a public use. The purposes of us, if you view the town as a corporation, is not to rent space out.
Of course not.
So we would not be able to do that.
But that
According
isn't,
to
that
the
isn't
law.
the purpose of the building. to
It
rent
doesn't say
space.
the purpose of the building. It has nothing to do with the purpose of the building. It says the purpose of the corporation. So you can only use a piece of real property. This is what
I
we keep being
acquiesce
told
to
by the
your-
lawyers. So this is not me, I'm reading Paul's email.
I get
You
it, I
say
get it.
Paul no longer agrees.
And
Let's get Paul to email us that.
I'm just
what you
saying what
just
they
said.
do in Roundout.
What they
And-
do in Roundup is multiple municipalities share the building.
2 municipalities, right?
Yeah, and if we could convince Margaretville to go in on it with us, they've got a really nice town hall, they don't
We're
think they
not
want
talking
to.
about, we're talking about that they actually do rent out space to other entities.
all right, so
Like an
Rhonda,
engineering firm,
if Rhonda does do that, right?
yeah.
If Rhonda does do that, how is that legal, is my question. How do they, what is their,
If I had to make a guess, it's probably not, and they're simply taking the risk.
okay.
And then, like, is the school realistically going
Yeah.
to sue 2 townships for a
That's-
room?
Okay.
If I had to guess, I mean,
Well,
I don't know if
in
it's
the
a
absence
risk
of other
I'm willing to
information.
take.
The
but-
school isn't selling it to us for $1, thinking that we're gonna turn around and just rent it to somebody else, the school in entirety, as a for-profit entity.
I have another question. If we can prove that we are solely renting out the space that we have to keep up with the upkeep of the Phoenicia School, just so we can have the property, let's say, you know what I mean? Like, I went there today to go to the playground with my daughter.
Yeah.
You're looking at the place like, man, this is pretty nice. It'd be really nice to have this. At the same time, you don't wanna sink the town, right? If we can show that, the money coming in, we're not using it as a cash cow, we're using it practically to keep it afloat, right?
Right.
Put the excess money, if there is any, which I can't see that there would be, but if there is, in an account that stays there, that is solely used for the upkeep of Phoenicia School, for such things as the roof, for such things as this tank, these are things that we're gonna have to.
Pay the heat, pay the electric, all the
Right.
maintenance that goes on with it.
I think that would be, worth asking.
Well,
I don't
did
think
ask.
the law has any stipulation for, listen, it's okay to break the law
It-
if you need to.
That's a good way to
Like,
put it.
I only rob banks to pay my
Yeah,
bills.
yeah,
That's what
no,
we're
I hear
saying.
you,
What-
and that's my question,
Yeah.
that's pretty much my question.
The comptroller's office
Not
couldn't
much.
show me,
That's good.
and this is what I was asking them for. I said, show me if it's okay or if it's contrary. And they said, we only have where the one entity sells it to another entity for under the market price. And that entity has to be a public good corporation or a municipality.
What could be helpful as a question to Paul?
What that municipality does or public entity we can't say.
But to take from Paul's language there, from the legal language there, it says public use. That sounds like sort of like a protected term in effect. Like what is the history of public use? How has that been interpreted? Because if public use is interpreted very broadly, as in, well, renting to a for-profit entity as somewhat of a, it's less than 10% of the building for the purposes of sort of maintaining its upkeep. If that's a very, like a sort of a very permissive reading of public use, then what you suggested, sort of makes a ton of sense there.
Yeah, how specific is it?
If public use is very strict, well, it must be exactly what the corporate entity, i.e. the town of Shandaken's operations are. If that's interpreted narrowly, then in fact, almost everything is out other than literally just our offices. But it strikes me that that term public use has to have a history behind it in
And
New
it
York State.
may.
Or at least a definition.
I don't know that we need this, and we need to rent it out to move forward. I think we're just tripping ourselves up. And if in the future we find that we can find a public use, means that, oh yeah, 10% or 20% can be used for augmenting whatever fees and the residents of the community have to bear, then we'll do that. But if we don't feel comfortable as a board renting out some space, then we will do that.
But there's a tricky problem here, because there's the $1 purchase, which is what comes with these restrictions.
Right.
There's the market value purchase, which does not come with these restrictions. So
Yeah,
the definition of public use has a quantifiable financial value to it. I mean, we don't know exactly what market value is per se, but whatever the difference is between $1 and that is the meaning of public
Well,
use.
what we have to, I get that, and what we have to decide is that if buying it for $1, figuring that we can't rent any of that space and get extra revenue, and we have, maybe in 10 years, $1 million in repairs that we have to do, compared to letting it go on open market and perhaps paying, $500,000 for it, still having those repairs to do in 10 years, but we could maybe get somebody to come in and rent out some of those spaces, like a doctor's office or a dentist's office or.
I mean, at that point, the whole building is up for grabs,
Right. But
including
will that-
selling it.
we could turn.
Well, I
around.
mean, literally at that point, if we bought it for market value, we could do literally anything with it, right? I mean,
We could sell it for market value if we sold it for
You could
less,
flip it.
we could.
I mean, I'm not.
I mean, if
I'm against that.
there were.
Agreed, but I mean, the point being that
Just
like.
saying.
I mean, if the school district
Just
isn't
saying.
able to sell it to anyone, I don't think that's really good
Yeah.
land for us.
No, I agree, I'm just saying that like, at that point, those
The
restrictions.
point is, if we were to buy at market value, the possibilities around this.
Right.
We certainly have more possibilities.
Right.
Does Roundup not rent the school from the school district? I thought they pay $7,000 a month or something.
They did in the beginning, and then they had, they did that for.
They purchased it
7, 8
after-
years, and then they
yeah,
purchased it after a certain period for the $1. And when they were renting it, part of it was the two municipalities and the school.
Yeah. I just wonder if that has anything to do with them being able to skirt around who they rent to. But
I don't think
it's neither here nor
they did the same sort of thing, buying it for under market value, yeah. I don't know, and that option, that example, while it's not open to us right now, it's not open to us right now because we missed the vote, because we didn't learn about the lease option until much too late. But we also can't buy it for $1 right now because we've missed the vote. So neither of those options are actually open to us until
Well, the one option is that
Well-
we can tell them to put it open for the market, put it on the open market.
I believe they do have it on the market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But either way, it would be next May for the school.
Next May
Yeah.
is when the school board must, all we really have to do is decide between now and however much time they need before May.
February or something.
May 18, by February of next year, probably a good deadline, we'll confirm that with Victoria. If we would like to do the $1, or if we'd like to do the lease example that leads to a purchase.
I
They
don't-
both may be options.
But what's the plus for the lease option?
The maintenance.
They still
We
make
just-
us do the maintenance.
The lease agreement that they have with Hurley, they paid, the towns paid, I thought it was $4,000 a month, was it $7,000 a month?
I thought Rondout was 7,000.
$7,000 a month, and the district was maintaining the properties. That was in the lease agreement.
Right, because with that scenario, the district was still there. They still had offices
Right.
in there. And it was 4,000 for each of the
I mean,
towns.
obviously, it would be that's a lease example. We
Right,
would have to
right. It was-
negotiate what
right.
the actual lease would be.
Exactly.
But we've got until February of next year to have all these questions answered.
If it's not sold.
If it's not sold. There is a possibility, I suppose, that it could be sold.
It's a small one.
Yes.
So right now, do you see ourselves financially capable of maintaining that building, if we buy it for $1 without renting it out? Of maintaining
We would
and-
have to raise taxes.
Or get a grant to repair it.
In a flood zone, so no grants.
Zero.
Some grants are, but very few.
Yeah,
I don't understand
Federal
buying
grants,
it.
no, but.
I don't understand buying it and waiting 10 years to do the $1 million bond. The roof
Oh,
will be
no, I didn't say
falling
wait
in
10
right
years.
there.
The roof isn't falling in, but I didn't say, I said over 10 years we would bond it out, not in 10 years we would bond it. We would bond it out right away and try and get those,
And start the
or as
repair.
soon as we, and I think it would be sooner than 10 years, that the roof and, the oil tank, first off, should get changed right away, because that's just a ticking time bomb.
Which is about $1 million, if that $227,000 is correct, right? And $700,000 is correct?
Yeah.
That's $1 million right there.
That's not right.
That's without even moving in or anything.
Right. I know.
How do the costs operationally, do you think, compare to being here? Like, cause we can
When we
generally
compare
afford this.
costs- When we compare costs, like, this is not even 3,000 square feet, and that's 30,000 square feet.
Right.
It was about 3 times the amount that we pay to maintain.
But for 10
heat.
times the amount of
But
space.
for a lot more.
What about looking into public uses that could generate income or that
Well, so that's the other
Like,
question, is what is the public
rent,
use?
like if you rent it to entities that could get grants to pay, you know, maybe it's
Yeah, but can we even rent it? That's the.
maybe it's an urgent care, well, that's the question of what is
Well,
public.
we
Is
could
an
rent
urgent
to
care
some-
center, for example,
To
would that
some
qualify?
public use people, you know, if you.
we keep saying that, but for
So-
example, who,
Yeah.
have they agreed to
Who?
rent from us, and how much are they gonna pay us to do
Well,
it?
that's the thing.
Right now, we're just saying, oh,
And-
we'll rent it to public uses, that's,
And I think public
you know,
use
it's another name one.
has
Well,
to be
you
a
know,
nonprofit entity doing a public service. I don't think
Like
consider.
ours.
Well, but to your point of a medical center, some of those are nonprofits and some of those are not, and I think that's a distinction that gets made in that. I don't think any
Right.
urgent care would.
Or it could
And
be a-
according to, when we did
It could be a
ask,
daycare center that gets grants.
If it's a nonprofit daycare.
you know,
But
I
even,
mean,
even when they were talking about different ideas, different examples, they were talking about a school giving it to a housing authority, not the authority, but a place who wanted to do housing. It wasn't not-for-profit, it was a for-profit housing association. And they were okay with that because it was a public good.
Well, so that's all gets into what is a public use. I mean, like that, it just feels like a legal
Well,
question that
a
needs an answer.
nursery or some kind of a daycare.
those would be very problematic to put in there. I looked into it extensively with, experts in the field on schools.
Maybe,
And reusing that, any part of it at all, as a nursery or a daycare or even a pre-K, very problematic. The security issues, the construction costs to isolate, separate it, and
You're right.
children's play yards have to be fenced in, it would be
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
prohibitive.
Yeah.
I looked into trying to get Woodland Playhouse to move there
Okay.
instead of building new,
Yeah,
and they couldn't make it work.
okay.
There's a a lot of laws for daycares and pre-Ks and that sort of thing, a lot of laws.
So it would be cheaper for them building a new than retrofitting a former school? Well, I know we can't do a charter school because I'm sure the school district would.
That's actually in the,
In the
in the,
con-
yeah,
right.
in the con, not allowed, no, couldn't be a school of any kind.
Peter, what are you thinking goes there? What do you think, like,
You know,
cause if we can't get public grants for town hall purposes, like I thought that made it a non-starter a year ago. And now it's like we're revisiting it because it seems like a good deal, but like besides town hall, which doesn't need that much space, like what do you, what?
but it's not, I mean, it's still could be a community center.
Yeah.
I mean, there could be recreation there, even some of the rooms could be, community center, you know.
And,
there
and
could
that's
be
the kind of thing that
Pilates-
could get grants.
Pilates
instead
in
of
one
paying rent.
room, or,
It's still in a floodplain.
No, but like for operational, like for example,
Maybe, but I mean, operational grants are so thin on the ground to begin with.
that's true,
But they
but I don't know
exist.
how much money you need to get in rent.
Like writing a grant for rent is,
We imagine
no,
somewhere in the
no,
neighborhood
what
of
I mean by that is-
$125,000 to $150,000 a year just to keep the building open.
that includes staff.
I think that included a very small, like 1 or 2 person janitorial staff, that's it.
What is the cost? I'm sorry.
$125,000 to $150,000 a year.
What I'm trying to say is that.
Not,
Minus-
no
minus
repairs,
what-
that's
minus
just
what we're
operating.
paying
Yeah.
here.
What I was
That is what
referring
we're paying here?
to,
No, minus
Minus.
what we're paying here.
what I was referring to is, for example, with rural preservation corporations, there are grants that you can get, that they get for operational costs, which can include personnel and renting office space. That would be a nonprofit, public use, could rent from this building,
Yeah.
as an example.
It's a challenge. It's a, I mean, I would hate to lose that.
Well, the thing I would hate to lose, isn't there an amount of money that needs to be used within the year that was gonna be for town hall offices?
ARPA, I think is what you're referring to probably.
I mean, I remember sitting in a meeting here when we were talking about the school versus Stony
That had to get
Farm versus
redesignated.
whatever.
I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that had to be earmarked and we used it for
By the
the
end.
highway.
It had to be earmarked by the end of last year. So
Right. It
we had
was
used
so
it for
steep.
various projects.
So it's not
Okay.
Already spent.
on highway,
A
Trucks.
few things.
A chunk of it, some of it went to Parks and Rec, some of it went, I think we had earmarked for the parking lot and
The
Pine Hill at some point.
AEDs
AEDs.
and the electric charging.
And those funds had to be used for very specific things pertaining to COVID. that,
right,
You know,
so that money's going to the Pine Hill parking lot.
Oh, no,
no,
Some
that
of
was the
it.
first thing we had earmarked, I think that got squared away, and then we are using it for highway.
Because it had to be used by a certain time, like,
Well, and we have until next year to use it, but it had to be
Earmarked.
appropriated by last year at the end of the year. And so
More specifically than original had, because we had attempted to earmark it for the town hall, but that was deemed to be insufficiently specific, so it had to go to something with an invoice. And what we had an invoice for was a truck.
Right, right, it had to have an invoice. Just because we had a resolution wasn't enough of
Wasn't
an
sufficient.
obligation.
Then we would have lost it if we didn't earmark it.
Yeah, no, I didn't wanna lose that, I just remembered there was discussion about allocating it differently.
You-
so
well,
that's-
you are-
We
you are
did a
correct.
resolution
We did.
allocating it for the town hall, but
Right.
it was deemed to be insufficiently specific, so then we had to do it again for something that was attached to an invoice.
I had gotten advice from Association of Towns who, well, if you put it in a fund, a certain fund, then you could spend it on anything. And so I created this capital reserve fund. We did towards the end of the year, and then I found out later that, nope, that doesn't work. We were scrambling and we got it
So-
appropriated.
So the answer that I got was taxes would have to be raised, to be financially capable of maintaining the school, we have any clue how much taxes would have to be raised? Is it that 150,000 a year?
No, because we will be eventually, maybe not right away, certainly the first year or the second year, be closing down some uses. I haven't gotten the numbers yet from DEP as to how much they would pay us for a buyout of this building if we were to sell it, and nothing is set in stone. They're just giving us an appraised value, blah, 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 blah,
But
blah.
we couldn't move town hall in its entirety to Phoenicia Elementary. We've agreed on that many times, that if we made Phoenicia Elementary the new town hall, we would need other locations, not just for highway, but some sort of emergency
Response
center, somebody in case of a flooding again. So
Well-
it wouldn't be, oh, we've saved $35,000 a year by not maintaining this building, so it's only costing us $120,000 a year to operate that as a cost difference, but we'd need another whole location that we'd have to maintain as well.
But this isn't an emergency operations center. We're in a major floodplain.
Right.
More so than the school.
Yeah.
So this isn't, it's not like, oh, we have to keep this and use it as an emergency.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay,
Nobody
why do
said
we
that,
have,
but
why do
we
we
need a
have to
second
keep this?
location? We don't have to keep this. I never said that. I said we would need a second location
of
in
course,
addition
of course.
addition to Phoenicia
Of
Elementary.
course.
So
That's
most
still-
likely, every penny we save by closing this will be spent running another location, so we're still on the bill 100% for the cost of operating Phoenicia Elementary. I don't think there's any savings there.
We'd also have to rebuild or move the dog kennel and
Save.
recycling
Yeah,
center.
save would have to be relocated. And I don't know that we could put save at Phoenicia Elementary
Or the recycling center.
or the recycling center, either one. I think we
Maybe,
could
but
put there.
both of those would be tricky.
Probably
Yeah.
not the recycling center.
Yeah, and even if we could, I don't think it's a really nice idea to go
No.
and offer to shelter animals in a flood zone, which is what we're doing now.
Which is what we're doing now, even more.
Yeah,
That's
but-
a
I don't
500-year
know,
flood zone.
I don't like, hey,
100-year flood
we've been
zone.
doing it wrong for 10 years, let's keep doing it
That
wrong.
would be a question for save, right?
Yeah,
But the recycling center also, again, presents
We
a
can't
a
put
tricky
recycling
bit
center
there again.
Mhm.
So now
Maybe
we're
that
in
could go to Glenbrook, but it's still
multiple
gonna cost
locations.
money to
yeah.
move that stuff. But I mean, if the operational, to your original question about cost, if the increase to the operations, just heat, electricity, staffing, was
50,000.
150,000.
Let's go with the higher end.
And then presumably, if it needs $1 million worth of repairs in 20 years, it would need another $1 million worth of repairs. Probably realistically more, but fuzzy math, right? So 5% of that would be $50,000. So there's $200,000, $50,000 put away into a capital fund for
Yep.
future replacements, right? So that's
Mhm.
about a $200,000 increase, which
Per year, which is like a 4% increase in your taxes.
yeah, so that's sort of a
Generally.
minimum of about a 4% on top of the normal 2%.
So right, on
Like
top
a
of the,
6 or 7% increase. Really fuzzy math, probably a
Mhm.
little thin.
Which wasn't the whole school closure supposed to save us money in taxes, that was their whole pitch, that.
I mean, that'd be
It's
school.
gonna-
School tax.
School
We're
tax.
talking-
That's,
Yeah.
I know, but I'm just saying.
you're
it's
just trading one for the other, yeah.
Oh no, school taxes went up too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're also going up substantially.
But not because of the $70 million bond.
I'm just
I thought it was
trying to,
760.
just wrap my head around it a little bit more.
I mean, it sounds like we still need to get some roof quotes, right? You were asking about that, so
Yeah.
that's still up in the air. I do still personally think getting a more definition of public use would be helpful.
I think that would be very good.
Can I ask one more question, as long as we're talking about town hall? Has there been any more progress on this potential big Indian deal? Is that being actively
There's
worked on?
no active. What happened was it went in as a request, and it went to some DEP person who's put it on somebody's desk to get this done. It could happen within 6 months, it new info on it yet. Yeah.
And am I correct in assuming that we no longer have a capital reserve fund if we were trying to put ARPA money?
Yeah, right, we never put it,
So
never even created it.
chances are, without a capital reserve fund, DEP and AWS&P or whoever the parties are that are involved are not gonna push hard on that, because they've been burned before by us. Probably.
They want to
No.
help.
They wanna help,
I-
but
we
without,
have
without
not-
us having skin in the game,
I
they're not
think-
gonna work super hard for us.
It's true, and it's true, but I think DEP is a little embarrassed because they, for years, have always said, oh, we do, land swaps all the time. Well, if there's something that's not in a flood zone and you wanna use, they were always preaching that. And now that this is like the first time one of the municipalities said, oh, do you have some land we need to put and we found it, we've been looking and scouring, and it kind of put them on the spot, so they're, I think, a little embarrassed that.
No, it's not the first time, we did one with them, and then we didn't do anything with the parcel.
Well, that was having CWC buy a parcel that we saw. It wasn't separating out a DEP parcel.
All I'm saying is, my perception of the reality is they have a bad taste in their mouth.
Of course, for many reasons.
Yeah, so it's like, without that capital reserve fund, I don't know that that is a realistic conversation. It's more on the 2 years than the 6 months. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
I mean, I would
Yeah,
think you would agree with that.
I believe so too.
Yeah.
But FEMA just,
Lost all their funding?
well,
All their flood mitigation funding, that's true.
yeah, but FEMA came in with the new flood maps that we didn't expect to see for 10 years.
Mhm.
And they had it done in months that we were not expecting. There's another,
Are these the accurate maps, or are they?
these are
inaccurate maps?
new accurate maps.
Okay.
And I have a meeting with them tomorrow afternoon down at the AWS&P offices. I don't know if you're keyed in on that.
I'm not gonna be in town.
FEMA will be showing us, they did about a month ago show us the new maps. We're gonna be going over them a little bit more closely. Olive Supervisor, Eric Highway Superintendent, will be Heidi, and I'll make sure you're sent to.
Yeah, I met with Heidi last week.
Okay.
What we should do is in this budget cycle, in the general general budget, put some money, even if it's $10,000, just create that fund and start,
I would agree.
you know.
Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah,
think
That's a note for-
we do have a capital reserve account that I believe has $30,000 in it.
So, I mean,
That's it. Yeah.
you know,
Cause if the school is a year out at least, 2 years doesn't sound that much longer.
No.
Either way, I think that's just exploring, to your point, exploring other options in case, obviously the school we've been talking about for a long time now, and we've made very little headway
I mean,
as
even,
far as reaching the resolution here.
Yeah.
I
Can
mean,
we make a couple of action points? One of our sticking points right now is we're once again debating what the law means, so we need a definition of public use.
Yeah.
Can we get that from Paul? Can Paul provide us with a definition of public use
Pertaining
based
to this,
on the education law? Education law, section 405? What does that, and there's really no point to the five of us sitting around and imagining what public use is if we don't know.
and even if that big Indian parcel just went, like, even if we got, like, this is all theoretical, even if we got the school, right, that big Indian parcel could still be used for the highway
The
garage,
highway garage is
right?
And
And a
an
emergency
EOC,
response.
right.
Right, okay.
The plan is even the county, wherever we find a new place to put a highway garage, they have their little garage here, which they don't feel is adequate, it's very out of date. They were going to renovate it, but they know that we're looking for another parcel, they wanna work with us and co-locate with us with an EOC. So they've put together, I don't think we got the grant, but they've put together a intermunicipal.
I thought that was not on the table anymore. That
It's
is
still,
on-
it's still on
is.
the table, yeah.
Okay.
But it's waiting for the DEP to get their ass together.
Mhm. I mean, the DEP's work, obviously, some of that is naturally gonna take time, but it strikes me as the type of process that will require some amount of basically political lobbying, you know, talking to Hitchie's office, talking to Jen Metzger, talking to CWC. And one of the things that makes that very tricky to do is this sort of bifurcation, right? If we can go to Senator Hitchie and say, we need an emergency center, so please press on the DEC to get this easement done, unraveled as quickly as possible. That's a very cogent talking point, right?
Mhm.
When it's sort of, well, we might do that, but we also might do this. No one ends that conversation ending like, oh, let me call DEP and find out what the status is, right?
Right.
Like, I think at some level we do need to come to terms with what we actually want to see, in particular with that big Indian parcel, because I do think we could lobby, and I think that would make that process faster and might line up some of the funding around it. And we have a very obvious story here, right? Like, we have thousands of gallons of fuel sitting in a floodway. I mean, it's not a
Yeah.
tough
And
sell, right?
environmental disasters, meaning the trucks that.
Right, I mean, like, we could be like, help us solve
And-
this problem for you, here's what we need, you to call DEP and find out the status of this. And that's again, like, that's a fairly easy conversation to have. But the few times that I've had it, the response has been, but I thought you were doing the school thing, and then it gets kind of unraveled.
Right.
And so I think if we make the clear cut, we are 100% in on the highway at least going there, then, okay, maybe that at least makes that a little bit easier to say. Well, we're not really sure about town hall, let's not talk about that, but highway and emergency services are going to begin in if you will do this for us.
And recycling and save.
Yeah, recycling and save.
I mean, not that I'm
No,
saying
no,
that
no, and
making that
well,
decision, I'm just saying.
And police, if they're willing to go there, I mean,
Mhm.
you know, like, we want an emergency and highways campus located in this big Indian parcel. If you're willing to do it, please help us with this.
And like you're saying, you know, the fuel and the trucks are,
Yeah.
and that tragedy has happened. You know, like that's a huge selling point. Like, it's real. Like,
Yeah.
it's not like this could happen. This has happened. Like, you know.
Yeah, no, we've got a history, and I
Yeah.
mean, it's not hard, we can look at, I mean,
Yeah,
it's, you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
and I mean, I've always thought of that as being, like, that's a really, really, really simple conversation, and why should you fund nearly all of this? Because it's poison.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah, I'm sure, you know, people that care about it even more than I do are gonna look
Yeah.
at it and go, oh my God.
it doesn't
you know,
make
this
any
is-
sense
yeah,
out of
right,
that,
right.
right?
But that begs the question, then why are we spending hours and hours and hours of our lives talking about a place to relocate the clerical staff? Which is in reality the only thing that's gonna move to the school. And as much as we wanna see it turn into a municipal building that can be used for community projects and public, whatever, public use and entities, at the end of the day, the only people who are going down there would be the supervisor's office. I mean, if highway's gonna be up there, highway secretary would go that way. So, I don't know. I don't see personally, and this is not new, I've felt this way the whole time, I don't see the benefit of pushing this through the school, like, we're gonna open another campus that's gonna cost
As much or more.
as much or more to operate as it is down there, and we're just gonna double our expenditures.
Exactly what I was getting to a minute ago, but I only pushed it on the EOC. I pointed, it's like, yeah,
And it's a frustrating place at the school, you know, not to throw the school board under the bus, but they've put us in this situation where now, if we don't do something with the school, we are the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
Because they closed the school, still raised taxes, and they threw it at us like, well, it's for $1, why wouldn't you want it? Well, you want it because it's actually like $1,001,000.
And they put articles in the paper, like disparaging the town, that's so stupid.
So you put it on the board, let it sit like Hurley said. You know, people are upset about it, I'm upset about it, because we can't really do anything with that building.
and quite honestly, if it hits the open market, and there's actually a price tag attached to it, then we can talk about buying it outright. I think we'll get it for a lot less than it's gonna hit the market for, then there's no restrictions, but it is gonna take time, we're not gonna do it this year.
It's frustrating because I think there's so many possibilities with that building, whether it be public housing, whether it's, you know, a food market, whether it's a community center that also is home to the farmer's market, but it's like, in reality, we are not necessarily the best entity to do that.
Yeah, because everyone looks at it and goes, boy, if it's only $1, what the hell's wrong with you guys? Why aren't you buying it? You know, it's,
Oh, yeah,
like you just said,
It needs a lot of work. I mean, yeah, it doesn't need it tomorrow, but definitely within 10 years, we're gonna end up spending $1 million. But on the flip side, if you spent $1 million, what would you get if you built something?
Probably something pretty okay.
Well, I mean, there's also, I mean, we don't really need 30,000 square feet.
We definitely do not
We
need
need,
30,000.
honestly, even this, I wouldn't say this building is too small, it's just poorly arranged, right? Like, this building could be half the size and it would accommodate nearly all of our meetings. If the, you know, if, like, the square footage, 3,000 actually doesn't seem that far off to me. It's just not ADA and it's just a terrible building, but
For around $1 million, you could get a 2,500 to 3,000 square foot building built. So that's what you'd get. You'd
Yeah.
get this building built right, coming up to code.
But we'll be able to be eligible for
Where?
grants.
Yeah.
We
Where
will
would you
get the
build?
parcel and a land swap.
Well, we just finished talking about the big Indian property. I thought that's where we were talking about.
well, and again, the point is like, to be determined, of course, but you
Yeah.
know, if that conversation, it's a lot easier to have that conversation politically when it is in fact the town's primary choice, right? Like,
Yeah.
we want to do this.
Well, I mean, reality is that 8 years ago, we put out to bid for a new highway garage and a new town hall down at that lot, that CWC, and it was, we got $12 million, and then the quotes, just, nobody could build it for that much. Not that we could get $12 million, but that was the amount that the engineers came up with for doing both these facilities.
Well, yeah, the highway isn't more expensive. You can get this building, not everything in this entire property. For $1 million, you can build a 2,600 to 3,000, maybe even a 4,000 square foot building, depending on size of space, but somewhere in that range, you can build.
But at the end of the day, we're gonna have to build $1 million highway garage anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And the SAFE, and recycling center, and the emergency operations center, and every office that isn't clerical, yeah.
Yeah, it would,
Yeah, everything you just said, yeah, that's all gonna be built. So if we're spending $1 million to fix Phoenicia Elementary and spending over $1 million to build a new facility, that just took our 4% tax increase to a 7% tax
I think
increase.
we were already at stuff.
yeah, I think we're at 7 with the
Okay.
2.
Can the big Indian facility be made big enough for everything?
Well, that was the
Or that
original
would be,
plan.
the parcel
Yeah.
is big enough.
That seems.
The parcel, it's a 250.
and everything would be
acre parcel,
consolidated
right?
into one campus. You know, you know, the police building on 42 would stay where it is, but the ambulance building is in dire need of repairs and
Yeah.
relocation, so they would probably be moved to there. You know,
But
like,
that
we've
doesn't
always
mean-
talked about the doctorate office being moved into a municipal building.
But they're not expecting an answer from our town until February, correct?
The school,
They-
but it is unopened.
That's
We
what-
missed
that's
the
what I mean for the
deadline.
school,
They
for the
don't.
school.
There's no like deadline on.
So then, they don't need to know that we don't want it either. That gives us 9 months to think of something else to do with it. And to come up with some more money somewhere.
Well, they know we want it, they just,
Don't
the
know.
hope is we'll decide we can afford it.
Right, but we don't have to make a decision.
Yeah, we can all.
Even if we did make a decision, we don't have to tell them.
Anyway, roof quote and clarification on language.
Roof, more building costs, yeah, exactly, yeah.
And just a note, the CAC starts here in 20 minutes.
Okay,
Leave,
so
right?
let's move on from the school for now then.
Next subject is the resolution about workplace alcohol, drug and alcohol. Wouldn't part of that,
There was some vagueness at the end, a paragraph
it
that
was that
said,
last paragraph.
if an employee consumes alcohol on any town-owned property,
They should
and
do it
the only-
responsibly.
no, it could be, that's not what it said, that'd be nice if that's what it said. What it says is they can be terminated, unless it's part of a specific town event. But for example, if someone went to, an event at Parish Field that was not a town, well, not Parish Field, that's not ours, at Glenbrook Park, any park, and had a beer, that's in violation of our alcohol policy.
I mean, it sounds like the preferred wording is some variation of,
We could just eliminate that.
well, just during work hours, right?
During work
When
hours.
when
Yeah.
you are working for the town, you should not be.
Consuming alcohol.
Exactly. Do you wanna prepare some language, just a proposed line?
Yeah, I think that's actually perfect, that takes care of it. I can,
Just strike that one and,
I'll work something up in the last paragraph, yes.
I can't drink during work.
No, you can't. Not everybody
Can't
should.
isn't, I mean, you're able to. I mean, just to be devil's advocate, obviously, I know this isn't what you're trying to say, but like, even elected officials, technically, we're always on the clock, right?
We're not covered by the alcohol policy.
well, we're also not fireable in
Yeah.
the.
Oh,
the-
So you're
classic
specifically
terms.
talking about the event exception, right?
Yeah,
So, the town may from time to time in its discretion host or direct employees to attend events or parties either on its premises or elsewhere where alcohol is available. There may be other situations where you choose to drink, for example, at seminars, dinners, and other events that you attend as a representative of the town. The town expects any employee who chooses to drink alcohol at these events to do so responsibly and not overindulge. Your
But-
actions reflect on the town. If you do not feel you can get home safely after drinking at one of these events, please let your supervisor or any other supervisor know so that we can make arrangements for you. Employees with a question about this
There's another
policy should
section.
speak. So that's the one I thought you were talking about.
that's the part where an exception is given. So there it says, it's okay to drink at these points, but there's another point in that law that says, no town employee can consume any alcoholic beverages
Gotcha.
on town
So
property.
there's a contradiction.
Yeah,
So let's just clear that and say while on duty.
yeah, during business hours, while on duty, something like that. I'll find the
While
exact.
working for the town, yeah.
Yeah,
So if somebody gets hammered at an event, their supervisor needs to drive them home.
Or find a way for them to get home.
Stay away from the ambulance highway part.
Don't call me.
yeah.
Well, we're exempt, right?
Don't call me.
We're not employees, I think
Yeah,
we
we're not
don't fall
employees.
under the employee.
But, nice to know.
We're the
Okay, to
employer.
help ensure a safe, healthy, and productive work environment, all our employees and others protect the town property, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's at the beginning, under new.
So I think that language should cover it then? While,
I think that resolves, if the one line has to be struck, but then reworded to indicate that it's not about the place, it's about the time almost, is more.
Yeah.
It kinda doesn't matter where you are, you shouldn't be drinking under work hours.
Yeah.
Like, that's the line, right?
Yeah.
It's a long way of saying, you know, like, here's a list of places you
Don't
can't
drink
drink,
on the
it's kind of
job.
irrelevant, like. One thing that is really quick that we might just very briefly wanna talk about, so we named at the last meeting, I don't believe you were at the last one.
I was not.
We named the Pine Hill Water Committee. We should probably do a meeting or help them set a meeting. I don't believe they have set one, right? Like, we named the people at the last meeting, right?
Uh-huh.
But I think it probably need to just help them establish a first meeting of some kind.
okay,
And a chair, I guess.
Yeah, they need to pick a chair.
Do you wanna do that, or you want me to?
either way is fine with me, it's just that, do we have contact info for everyone that's on that list? Okay, good, as long as I can get that contact info, that's fine with me.
Get that to you.
Perfect. I think the Pine, I'll talk to the Pine Hill Community Center, I'm sure we can meet there, or here. Just, that's in Pine Hill, so probably easier for them to attend.
Yeah.
Not that this is very far away, but hey.
Do we have time to talk about shop?
Yeah, 24 minutes. I had asked Barbara to pull some documents together, but I didn't hear back from her, and there was nothing left. So I don't think we have as much. You saw a few documents on them, but do we?
We don't have that much. Both Jackie and Joyce were looking through the Joyce has a digital copy, but she found where there was talk from 1982 or 1981 about, oh yeah, last year Sharp was formed, and it was formed because of, to do housing revitalization, to do flood work, and also the train station, to rebuild the train station in Phoenicia. She's looking for the document that shows where I know we got like a $300,000 HUD grant in Ladies, and where the town hired Sharp to be the administrators of that HUD grant. The HUD grant was originally, I think, gotten by Jane, and it was for more revitalization of Catskill Corners, the original Emerson. That they have turned into, also, it was a revolving loan. People, they paid back the loan and they would give out other loans. Some business part of it, what they do are business loans. I know Riccadella's got loans, Town Tinker Tube Rental, the liquor store, many places all over town, both Pine Hill and Phoenicia. And then they did small residential loans, people who wanted to put a heating system, roofing, septic systems before CWC was around.
So it's low interest loans to help community members or businesses in the community.
Right. And they have been submitting a voucher every year. We all signed it over the last many years, for between $3,500 and $4,500 to administer those loans. You signed last year's.
Yeah, I don't remember ever seeing one from them before, but I believe we have, but,
I have them on my desk if
Yeah.
you want to see.
So it's just an account.
So the problem we have, the problem I have with continuing this is, and I forget exactly what year, they are no longer a nonprofit organization. They failed to file the necessary annual paperwork to maintain their their nonprofit status. I believe the last time they filed was 2012. They have 3 years to catch up and do that filing, and they still didn't do it. So in 2015, 10 years ago, they lost their nonprofit status
federal.
at the federal level.
Federal.
Their state status is unclear.
They appear to still be nonprofit under the state, but they haven't filed the CHAR 500 for that same period of time. And so that state status is also at risk. And it appears that, in effect, the only reason they still have state nonprofit status is because it has not been challenged. But if it ever were, or if the Attorney General's office ever kind of dug into it, they would lose that. But they are also not effectively in good standing with the state either, because the CHAR 500 is not filed for, again, over a decade.
And the AG has an open, where it's not investigation,
Consideration case, whatever you want to consider.
there's an open case with the Attorney General's office into it. And I know a lot of people have tried to reach them over the last few years unsuccessfully. I believe, Sylvie, you are one of those such people who has failed at all attempts to try and communicate with them.
I know your name was brought up as an important.
Last week.
By whom?
No, this was a year or so ago by Jane.
They forgot to tell
At the
her.
one and only meeting.
Yeah, and
No,
Jane.
they talked about it and they were
Peter,
gonna continue.
Jane has told me point blank that they're not interested in revitalizing Sharp. They just want to do what they're doing.
Yeah.
James Amenta tried many times a couple of years ago to get Richard Lovelace to have new board members, and he refused. A year-long conversation. I, as a member of this community, have a real issue with the fact that there is a loan fund that was given to the Sharp or the town, right? That is not mentioned on the town website. There is nowhere online to find any information about this. Suppose I want to get one of these loans. How how would I even know this exists? I don't. It's a closed club of people who happen to know about it. It's not for the public good. It's been hidden behind however many curtains and smoke screens, and it's not accessible to our community. They are not responsive to our community. And just so you guys know, and I'm sorry to sound so upset about this, but it's annoying, we have a housing committee. If there's a housing fund for this town, the housing committee should have known about it the day we were formed. And just to make sure you guys all know, I think most of you probably have heard now, Sophie and I are launching a new nonprofit. It will become a rural preservation company to do what Sharp should be doing for this town, and we will be doing it. And probably not us eventually with set up a permanent board and hire an executive director, but I had a call with a lawyer on Saturday about this, and we are moving forward with this.
That's great. I know there were many iterations of people who were the director or chairman of Sharp, and over the years, the committee members have changed. I've never,
I understand if they're just exhausted and they've run out of steam and they've been doing this since the eighties.
I
Fair
kinda tell
enough.
Rich that too.
But they
Why don't we
need to
just
move on
move
and
it give it
relinquish.
up?
Well, Peter, didn't you get a loan from them last year?
Yeah.
And at what point in that process do you stop and think like, there are other people in this town who also really need this
Yeah.
for their existing structures, and to my understanding, yours is for a new build, which seems
For the heating system in my.
brand new construction. It's just frustrating to hear that our supervisor is benefiting in some way from something that nobody has any information about, even other members of the town board.
Well, that's
And that's-
sad that they don't. I
Well, it
mean,
just doesn't look.
No, you're missing
Sure.
what's sad.
Sure,
What's
I
sad
know.
is that you got the loan, not that we didn't know. I
Well,
think
why
that's
don't
the
you
part
know?
that's
Why
sad.
haven't you asked in the 3 years? You never heard of Sharp?
I have no idea what Sharp
Wait,
was.
but
Sharp
I
is
have
not
not
on the
even
website or
voucher
Facebook
last
page.
year.
Everybody in town
You
that I
guys
asked
signed
what Sharp
vouchers
was
for it.
said they're long closed. I don't remember signing a voucher. It's possible that one slipped through without notice. There's a lot of vouchers.
There are.
We
Oh,
catch a
so
lot
many.
of them that shouldn't get paid, such as this Sharp one right here. But let's just move forward
If you
to one thing that
Google
we need
Sharp,
to do in this. We
Nothing
get
comes up.
You can't find them.
You
they don't
cannot
answer
find them
phones.
online unless you dig. I dug.
But
I
here,
found some things.
let me, if I may.
Yeah.
Oversimplified, basically, Sharp works for us, or is supposed to be, managing this fund, administering funds, giving out loans, taking care of it. I don't know the proper wording, but I think we need to fire Sharp. Disassociate ourselves with Sharp, remove them from this process. Rupco is willing to take over these funds in the short term until perhaps we can get a new nonprofit set up that will do this.
And Rubco, by the way, said that once we get set up, we can become an affiliate of Rubco as an agency.
That was my understanding, but I think this is something we need, and I know I'm wording it wrong, and you can probably tell us how we're supposed to word this.
Well, I mean, we,
Sever the relationship with
yeah,
them
so, I
somehow.
mean, fundamentally, there is 2 town bank accounts. And it's town of Shandaken on the bank account. One had, last I saw, 599,000 in it, and the other one had around 50,000. So there's 2 bank accounts.
What are the, a total, what are the?
Total between the two is about 650,000 as of the last bank statement I saw. And they are in the name of the town. And Sharp, in the course of administering previously, prior loans. And to be fair, these, as best as I could tell, are quite outdated loans. These were loans, not recent loans, these were 10-plus-year-old loans. I have theories on how this money sort of came assembled, but it's pure theory at this point in time. But one way or another, they are cashing checks into our bank. And as best as I could tell, the most current warrant is they are charging us about $4,500 to cash checks that are loan payments over the course of the year. Now, as far as this particular warrant, strictly speaking, the work is done. So I do think that while we need to figure all this out, we will ultimately probably be advised to want to sign that warrant and pay it under the pre-existing kind of history we have, where the work was performed. But the entity that we have administering loans and putting money into our account is not in good standing. So to your point, figuring out how to sever that relationship, I think is important. And so I think there's at least two components to that. The one is, as best as possible, figuring out the original source of that money into that account. Because presumably it came from either a HUD loan or a CDBG loan, or it came from a loan source, or a grant source. And that itself I'm not sure of, because
I'm certain it was a grant, but Joyce will find it in the next couple.
because when we can find that, because of course we need to make sure is that we don't have to pay it back.
Of course.
Because it may be, we've got $650,000 in the bank, and we've also got a $650,000
Yeah, no, it's
liability.
a grant from it was a HUD grant.
So as long as we can confirm that, then the second bit is we need to figure out which loans are being paid into this. And then I think it's probably worth running this quickly through the lawyer, but at that point in time, okay, if administering pre-existing loans is as simple as, okay, here's a list of loans, here's what their monthly payments are, who has paid and who has not paid, that's work that I suspect we could probably do ourselves or hire out. And I don't think the most natural entity for that would necessarily be Rubco. I think it would be the accounting firm. Because that's the payment of loans, right? Like, that's not the administering of new loans, that's financial, like, loan
It's
pay.
basic bookkeeping.
Right, exactly, so.
To that though, if I understand, I don't think I'm remembering it correctly, but if they had maintained their nonprofit status, federal and state, and filed the Char 500, they would qualify for monies from the state to pay operating costs?
It's true, I mean, that's the
Yes.
home and community renewal money, Rural Development Corporation money.
So we're we have been paying them this
There's,
$4,000 a year because they no longer receive the funding that they stopped getting because they didn't file? Is that
That-
oversimplified?
well, that original agreement may have specified, in return for giving out loans, we will charge a 1% administrative fee, or we will charge $40 per hour account. Like, that original contract could have said, in order to, because the original work was probably the vetting of applicants, deciding of amounts, setting of loan terms, writing a contract, and then ultimately giving out a loan. That's work, right? Like, that's a,
Who's doing that now, Jane?
well, at this point in time,
The committee, not just Jane.
But what's the?
No,
No.
What are the?
Jane and Rich.
but at this point in
The
time,
only two people.
I'm not sure
No.
these funds still have loans going out against them. I
Right.
think that's separate.
They shouldn't unless the
think-
town is aware of the loan process.
I think these loans may really obviously be legacy of 10+ years, and that new loans are not coming out of this, because looking through those bank statements, I didn't see any outgoing money, except for
where-
one check a year.
Where, like Bob Gasparini just got a loan, cause a tree fell on his house.
I think that,
Who reviewed it? What was the criteria? How was it
I
decided?
think that was separate, completely separate from the town, and was Sharp's money, Sharp's fund.
Okay,
I don't think it had anything to do with this money or this fund.
gotcha.
And so, while that is problematic for Sharp to begin a loan, that's sort of Sharp's problem, right? Like, that's not town money.
Fully in bed with them.
They also, they own the property on Church Street, they get rents from
Yeah,
the 40.
I'm aware of that, but
I think that's,
we still haven't read a contract that the town has with Sharp, and it could potentially be from 1982. Is that what I'm understanding?
it's
There's
possible,
There's a
yeah.
contract that we haven't found yet, yeah, but it would be from like somewhere around 1987, 88, maybe.
How many other contracts exist like this in our town?
No,
Like,
there aren't that many entities.
so it's not that much to keep track of. It just seems
Except that
really,
it goes way back.
That's right.
Well, I mean, you say there's not that many, but, I mean,
I'm just
there's
saying,
there's a lot.
how many people are paying $4,500 a year to?
Yeah.
I would say.
Without even asking for anything in return. We don't ask, what do we get from them? They send us checks, or they deposit checks
Well,
in
he writes
our
out a
account?
voucher with all the hours he put in and with all the different loans that he administers.
And which includes collecting payment from every single outstanding loan? Because as far as
Well, it would.
town chatter is, there's a lot of loans that don't get paid back, and people are not being
There has
asked for
been
them.
So I think they're giving out loans from two separate funds.
I don't think.
And there's the town loans, and then there's their private loans. loans, that may still be true, but I don't think that encompasses 100% of their loans. So there are loans that they're giving out with money that is not town money.
Right.
Yes, Robert said he saw no evidence of any recent payouts from the town account. Only money going in, no money going out. So
Minus
recent
this
loans,
one warrant once a year to
Right.
pay them for admin.
the $4,500 a year is the only outgoing. So no loans are being drawn against the two accounts that are in the town's name that Robert was able to find. So any
Hopefully true.
recent loans are, we imagine, are coming from a third bank account that is not owned by the town, rather it is under Sharp's name.
And so
That's
that's a
between-
But again, it's all
private entity.
conjecture.
That's between them and the state government.
Pretty much, I mean, and so we still have a responsibility to try and take the town fund and separate them, administer them differently. But whatever they do with their own funds is a separate concern anyway.
Is it worth inviting a representative from Sharp to, just to hear their side of the story? Not that I don't believe everyone in this room, but, you know, has Mr. Lovelace been contacted to try to clear some of this up? Not that I don't think it's a good
I know
idea
that
to put it
Barbara
towards-
Mansfeld is the one who made me aware of their revocation of the federal nonprofit status and not filing the SHAR 500.
Mhm.
She works in nonprofits. She keeps tabs on all the local nonprofits. When the flag came up on them and their status, she reached out and said, I would like to help you get all your paperwork in order.
Mhm.
They were not interested.
Right.
Yeah,
And that's been going on for
I got a
couple
story
years.
that, our accountant takes care of all of our filings. He's been out with a family death
For
and
10
she'll be back.
13 years.
Well, this
Keith
was
was
just
the
last
family.
year.
It was like he died.
This
He
was
really
just
wanted
last
to
year.
die.
Guys,
Uh,
just to simplify this a little bit, I think I can say from the housing committee standpoint, what's important to us is there's town funds that could be used for housing and economic development, and that's what we should be using them for. Nobody needs to pay $4,500 a year for someone to go to the bank and deposit checks. And for the people who aren't sending their checks in on time, hand it over to a collection agency. It's really straightforward. We don't need Sharp involved. It's not, whether they did anything wrong or not is kind of water under the bridge. We just don't need them involved in the future.
Yeah.
And that's, so let's set a relationship with them officially as the town government.
And when they
How do we
dissolve,
do
they're
that
supposed to hand their
exactly?
funds over to
Well,
another
so
entity.
in the absence of a contract, we don't really have a relationship, right? And so if we don't find one and Sharp can't provide one, then, like I said, I think what we need to try and identify is what is the source of this funds to just fully confirm, these may not be free and clear, right? There may be
Right.
restrictions on their use that the town has to withhold, has to maintain. And then I think we wind up needing the list of loans, and then we talk to the lawyer and say, okay, can we administer these ourselves? And then if we know the source of the funds and what the money that we would expect to be receiving, and then I think we can talk to the lawyer and then to the accountant, and then I think that relationship is over. And us formalizing that in an agreement probably does make sense, but I don't think you don't need a contract to breach or end a contract, right? You simply, well, there doesn't appear to be one. Like I said, if we
And
don't
I asked
find
both
one, then
Rich
there
and
isn't.
Jane if they had access to the contract.
And so obviously that changes everything, right? Like if there is a contract, then there may be clauses on how that gets terminated. Most contracts have some language around that. It may also be sort of de facto terminated by the organization itself, sort of no longer being in good standing. But if no contract is found or can be provided, then there is none, right? Then we just have to figure out how to do it differently. I mean, if they don't have a contract, then they don't have one. So, I mean, I think, like I said, I think our next steps there is to, hopefully Joyce can find out the origin of these funds. If it's federal funding or state funding, we can almost assuredly foil whatever entity it came from. So all we need is like the program, right? And then we can get that elsewhere.
James also told me, James Pimenta, who works for HUD, told me that if these loans came from the Irene days, he feels quite certain that HUD no longer has the paperwork about it. So we don't
It was
really.
pre-Irene days. I mean, this HUD grant, I recall, I just moved to the area, it was the late 80s, and I remember it was a big to-do, oh, they got a grant for it.
And you that's the money.
82.
Right.
And then
that's
they
the
had a
money that the
refiling
town still
88.
has in this account.
Yes.
And so James is like, if it's that old, nobody's gonna be coming over
Well-
after us looking at what did we do with that money? They forgot about it by now.
I mean, that's true, like in the
It's-
absence of, like you said, if we don't find any contracts, then
It's just our money.
kinda,
Is it commingled with other funds that have nothing to do with this?
doesn't appear to be, there are two
No,
separate bank
Two
accounts.
separate.
Yeah, but we still
CDLF funds.
would wanna figure out
Do we-
what loans are being paid, right? And that's kind of in the list,
Do we,
but
do we still, obviously, there's still criteria as to how we administer those funds though, right?
well, I mean, that's.
It's not just our you know, it's not just like, oh,
Possibly
there's
not.
600 grand, you know?
No,
No, but that's what
possibly
James
not.
was saying, there might not be,
If-
if they're that
yeah.
old.
All right, well, let's
And
go
we
buy
don't
the
know if it's a
financial
loan or a
schools.
grant.
I mean,
You know?
It would be a great seed.
I don't know, you know,
Well,
I'm being funny, but at the same
waiting for
time,
that.
it's like, you know what,
Here's what I would.
we're looking for $1 million,
we
well,
do have
there
about
it
2
is.
minutes before the CES.
Not that I want, not that I'm saying to use that, it's a joke.
Can I leave you with my proposal? Take control of the bank accounts.
We do have control.
Yeah, we already do.
I mean, just get rid of Sharp.
Well, I think
The town will
we don't have
control-
total control, they still have a signature on it, you know,
We
it's,
should
even though
remove
it's in,
that.
it's
Even
in
without
town
a
of
contract.
Shandaken, it's their name and our name. So we don't
And
have.
then put a minimal amount of bookkeeping into it to maintain the loan payments coming in, so, because that's more town money that we wanna get back. And then just pause on the rest of this conversation until we can get up and running, and then let's have a town-wide, or community-wide even, input into what these funds should be used for, or, the entity that we're setting up is gonna be economic development. So our focus will be housing, because that's where our background, but ultimately, long-term, we wanna design this new nonprofit to be a broader economic development agency. So it also could be small business loans, it can be all sorts of things that the town, we can have ongoing conversations about what we think is appropriate.
And all that was originally what Sharp was. was
Yeah.
both economic development and
Yeah,
community development.
but
It seems like they don't wanna do it.
what's that?
It just seems like they don't wanna do it anymore. Is
It
that,
just feels like we've wasted the last 3 years in trying to get exactly this information of like, what is it, what are they doing, and how could we do it properly
And
so
it
that
turns out
more
there were people
people,
who knew,
more people
but as you said,
benefit.
they kept it to themselves in a tight circle, not sharing the information.
Yeah, that's the problem. And just to answer your question, Kyle, because they let their nonprofit status lapse, they are no longer eligible for any of the programs to get funding. And they probably, and Jane told me that they're all just old and tired, except that there's a couple people on the board who don't wanna let go of this little toy that they have to play with. Jane is like, I just wanna find someone to run the food pantry so I can retire and move to Florida. She's tired of it too. Or at least that's
Jane
what she
just
told me.
voluntarily, I mean, they're all volunteers, but Jane just, occasionally helps them with
Yeah.
administration.
Well, they're
She's
volunteers
been
who
away
get
from it.
paid
We got paid
$40
$4,500.
an hour, so that's not actually volunteering, is it? If she's a volunteer,
She's not paid.
well, the voucher that we have
Somebody's
coming
paying.
in says we're paying
Rich,
Sharp
what?
to pay, no, that's not what the voucher says, her name's on it.
Robert, what's our time check?
We are 1 minute past.
Okay.
Uh,
To be continued.
Motion to adjourn.
Make a
Second.
motion to adjourn.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.